everyone. I'm Boris. I'm a member of technical staff here at Anthropic, and I created Claude Code. And here to talk to you a little bit about some practical tips and tricks for using Claude Code. It's going to be very practical. I'm not going to go too much into the history or the theory or anything like this. And yeah, before we start, actually, can we get a quick show of hands? Who has used Claude Code before? Yeah, all right, that's what we like to see. For everyone that didn't raise your hand, I know you're not supposed to do this while people are talking, but if you can open your laptop and type this, and this will help you install Claude Code, just so you can follow along for the rest of the talk. All you need is Node.js. If you have it, this should work. Yeah, well, you don't have to follow along, but if you don't have it yet, yeah, this is your chance to install it so you can follow along. So what is Claude Code? Claude Code is a new kind of AI assistant, and there's been different generations of AI assistants for coding. Most of them have been about completing, like a line at a time, completing a few lines of code at a time. Claude Code is not for that. It's fully agentic. So it's meant for building features, for writing entire functions, entire files, fixing entire bugs at the same time. And what's kind of cool about Claude Code is it works with all of your tools. And you don't have to change out your workflow. You don't have to swap everything to start using it. So whatever IDE you use, if you use VS Code, or if you use Xcode, or if you use JetBrains IDEs, there's some people at Anthropic that you can't pry them from their cold, dead hands, but they use Claude Code. Because Claude Code works with every single IDE, every terminal out there. It'll work locally, over remote SSH, over tmux, whatever environment you're in, you can run it. It's general purpose, and this is something where if you haven't used these kind of free-form coding assistants in the past, it can be kind of hard to figure out how to get started, because you open it up and you just see a prompt bar, and you might wonder, like, what do I do with this? What do I type in? It's a power tool, so you can use it for a lot of things, but also because it can do so much, we don't try to guide you towards a particular workflow, because really you should be able to use it however you want as an engineer. As you open up Claude Code for the first time, there's a few things that we recommend doing to get your environment set up. And these are pretty straightforward. So run terminal setup. This will give you Shift-Enter for new lines, so you don't have to do like backslashes to enter new lines. This is, it makes it a little bit nicer to use. Do /theme to set light mode or dark mode or Daltonize themes. You can do /install GitHub app. So today we announced a GitHub app where you can mention Claude on any GitHub issue or pull request. So to install it, just run this command in your terminal. You can customize the set of allowed tools that you can use so you're not prompted for it every time. This is pretty convenient. For stuff that I'm prompted about a bunch, I'll definitely customize it in this way so I don't have to accept it every time. And something that I actually do is for a lot of my prompts, I won't hand type them into Claude Code. If you're on macOS, you can go into your system settings, under accessibility is dictation, and you can enable it. And so something I do is you just hit like that dictation key twice, and you can just speak your prompt. And it helps a lot to have specific prompts. So this is actually pretty awesome. You can just talk to Claude Code and like you would another engineer, and you don't have to type a lot of code. So when you're starting out with Claude Code, it's so freeform and it can do everything. What do you start with? The thing I recommend above everything else is starting with Codebase Q&A. So just asking questions to your Codebase. This is something that we teach new hires at Anthropic. So on the first day in technical onboarding, you learn about Claude Code, you download it, you get it set up, and then you immediately start asking questions about the Codebase. And in the past, when you were doing technical onboarding, it's something that taxes the team a lot, right? You have to ask other engineers on the team questions. You have to look around the code, and this takes a while. You have to figure out how to use the tools. This takes a long time. With Claude Code, you can just ask Claude Code, and it'll explore the code base. It'll answer these kind of questions. And so at Anthropic, onboarding used to take about 2 or 3 weeks for technical hires. It's now about 2 or 3 days. What's also kind of cool about Q&A is we don't do any sort of indexing. So there's no remote database with your code. We don't upload it anywhere. Your code stays local. We do not train generative models on the code. So it's there, you control it, there's no indices or anything like this. And what that means is also there's no setup. So you start Claude, you download it, you start it, there's no indexing, you don't have to wait, you can just use it right away. This is a technical talk, so I'm going to show some very specific prompts and very specific code samples that you can use and hopefully improve and up-level your Claude Code experience. So some kind of questions that you can ask is, like how is this particular piece of code used, or how do I instantiate this thing? And Claude Code, it won't just do like a text search and try to answer this. It'll often go a level deeper, and it'll try to find examples of how is this class instantiated, how is it used, and it'll give you a much deeper answer, so something that you would get out of a wiki or documentation, instead of just like Command F. Something that I do a lot also is ask it about Git history. So for example, why does this function have 15 arguments? And why are the arguments named this weird way? And this is something I bet in all of our code bases, you have some function like this or some class like this. And Claude Code can look through Git history. And it'll look to figure out how did these arguments get introduced, and who introduced them, and what was the situation, what are the issues that those commits link to. And it'll look through all this and summarize it. And you don't have to tell it that in all this detail. You just ask it. So just say, look through Git history, and it'll know to do this. The reason it knows, by the way, is not because we prompted it to. There's nothing in the system prompt about looking through Git history. It knows it because the model is awesome. And if you tell it to use Git, it'll know how to use Git. So we're lucky to be building on such a good model. I often ask about GitHub issues. So it can use web fetch, and it can fetch issues and look up context on issues too, and this is pretty awesome. And this is something that I do every single Monday in our weekly stand-up is I ask, what did I ship this week? And Claude Code looks at the log, it knows my username, and it'll just give me a nice readout of everything I shipped. And I'll just copy and paste that into a doc somewhere. So yeah, that's tip number one. For people that have not used Claude Code before, if you're just showing it to someone for the first time, onboarding your team, the thing we definitely recommend is start with Codebase Q&A. Don't start by using fancy tools. Don't start by editing code. Just start by asking questions about the code base. And that'll teach people how to prompt. And it'll start teaching them this boundary of like, what can Claude Code do? What is it capable of? Versus what do you need to hold its hand with a little bit more? What can be one-shotted? What can be two-shotted, three-shotted? What do you need to use interactive mode for in a REPL? Once you're pretty comfortable with Q&A, you can dive into editing code. This is the next thing. And the cool thing about any sort of agentic, like using a LM in an agentic way is you give it tools, and it's just like magical. It figures out how to use the tools. And with Claude Code, we give it a pretty small set of tools. It's not a lot. And so it has a tool to edit files. It has a tool to run bash commands. It has a tool to search files. And it'll string these together to explore the code, brainstorm, and then finally make edits. And you don't have to prompt it specifically to use this tool and this tool and this tool. You just say, do this thing, and it'll figure out how to do it. It'll string it together in the right way that makes sense for Claude Code. There's a lot of ways to use this. Something I like to do sometimes is before having Claude jump in to write code, I'll ask it to brainstorm a little bit or make a plan. This is something we highly recommend, and something I see sometimes is people, they take Claude Code and they ask it, hey, implement this enormous, 3,000-line feature. And sometimes it gets this right on the first shot. But sometimes what happens is the thing that it builds is not at all the thing that you wanted. And the easiest way to get the result you want is ask it to think first. So brainstorm ideas, make a plan, run it by me, ask for approval before you write code. And you don't have to use plan mode. You don't have to use any special tools to do this. All you have to do is ask Claude, and it'll know to do this. So just say, before you write code, make a plan. That's it. This is also, I wanted to include this one, this commit push PR. This is a really common incantation that I use. There's nothing special about it, but Claude is kind of smart enough to interpret this. So it'll make a commit, it'll push it to the branch, make a branch, and then make a pull request for me on GitHub. You don't have to explain anything. It'll look through the code, it'll look through the history, it'll look through the Git log by itself to figure out the commit format and all the stuff, and it'll make the commit and push it the right way. Again, we're not system prompting it to do this. It just knows how to do this. The model is good. As you get a little bit more advanced, you're going to want to start to plug in your team's tools. And this is where Claude Code starts to really shine. And there's generally two kinds of tools. So one is bash tools. And an example of this, I just made up this Barley CLI. This isn't a real thing. But you can say, use this CLI to do something. And you can tell Claude Code about this. And you can tell it to use, for example, like -- help to figure out how to use it. And this is efficient. If you find yourself using it a lot, you can also dump this into your Claude.md, which we'll talk about in a bit, so Claude can remember this across sessions. But this is a common pattern we follow at Anthropic, and we see external customers use too. And same thing with MCP. Claude Code can use bash tools, it can use MCP tools, so just tell it about the tools, and you can add the MCP tool, and you can tell it how to use it, and it'll just start using it. And this is extremely powerful, because when you start to use code on a new code base, you can just give it all of your tools, all the tools your team already uses for this code base, and Claude Code can use it on your behalf. There's a few common workflows, and this is the one that I talked about already, so kind of do a little bit of exploration, do a little bit of planning, and ask me for confirmation before you start to write code. These other two on the right are extremely powerful. When Claude has some way to check its work, so for example, by writing unit tests or screenshotting in Puppeteer or screenshotting the iOS simulator, then it can iterate. And this is incredible because if you give it, for example, a mock and you say, build this web UI, it'll get it pretty good. But if you let it iterate 2 or 3 times, often it gets it almost perfect. So the trick is give it some sort of tool that it can use for feedback to check its work. And then based on that, it will iterate by itself and you're going to get a much better result. So for whatever your domain is, if it's unit test or integration test or screenshots for apps or web or anything, just give it a way to see its result and it'll iterate and get better. So these are the next steps. Teach Claude how to use your tools and figure out the right workflow. If you want Claude to jump in and code, if you want it to brainstorm a little bit, make a plan, if you want it to iterate, kind of have some sense of that so you know how to prompt Claude to do what you want. As you go deeper, beyond tools, you want to start to give Claude more context. And the more context, the smarter the decisions will be, because as an engineer working in a code base, you have a ton of context in your head about your systems and all the history and everything else. So there's different ways to give this to Claude. And as you give Claude more context, it'll do better. There's different ways to do this. The simplest one is what we call Claude.md. And Claude.md is the special file name. The simplest place to put it is in the project root. So the same directory you start Claude in, put a Claude.md in there. And that'll get automatically read into context at the start of every session. And essentially, the first user turn will include the Claude.md. You can also have a local Claude.md. And this one, you don't usually check into source control. So Claude.md, you should check into source control, share with your team so that you can write it once and share it with your team. This one, you don't check in. It's just for you. The kinds of things you put in Claude.md, it's like common bash commands, common MCP tools, architectural decisions, important files, anything that you would kind of typically need to know in order to work in this code base. Try to keep it pretty short, because if it gets too long, it's just going to use up a bunch of context, and it's usually not that useful. So just try to keep it as short as you can. And for example, in our code base, we have common bash commands, we have a style guide, we have a few core files, kind of things like that. All the other Claude.mds, you can put them in other nested child directories, and Claude will pull them in on demand. So these are the Claude.mds that will get pulled in automatically, but then also you can put Claude.mds in nested directories, and those will get automatically pulled when Claude works in those directories. And of course, if you're a company, maybe you want a Claude.md that's shared across all the different code bases, and you want to manage it on behalf of your users, and you can put it in your enterprise root, and that'll get pulled in automatically. There's a ton of ways to pull in context. I actually had a lot of trouble putting this slide together just to communicate the breadth of ways you can do this. But Claude.md is pulled in automatically. You can also use / commands. So this is .claude/commands, and this can be in your home directory, or it can be checked into your project. And this is for / commands. And over here, we have a few examples of the / commands that we have in Claude Code itself. And so, for example, if you're in the Claude Code repo, and you see issues getting labeled, that's actually this workflow running here. It's labeled GitHub issues. And we have a GitHub action running, the same one we talked about this morning, where Claude Code will run this command, and it's just a / command. It'll run, and it'll label the issues, so humans don't have to. It just saves us a bunch of time.